All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm so pleased to be here today. Today we're going to be talking about communication and just like different ways that we can communicate um, with each other. And I really like this training because I'm a forensic interviewer, and in a little while I'm going to explain what forensic interviewing is, but it is such a different way of communicating that I think that when we use these techniques in just regular conversation as we're trying to create connection with each other, it does make a huge difference. So, for those of you who haven't had an experience working with me before, let me introduce myself. My name is Myra Strand, and I'm the co-owner of Strand Squared Solutions. It's a small training and technical assistance company. In fact, it's so small, it's me and my husband, right? That's why it's called Strand Squared. I come from a long history of criminal justice. I've worked in the field as a crime victim advocate since the mid 1990s, working in trauma in one way or another. I've worked with child abuse, I've worked with trafficking, in human trafficking, I've done death notifications, I've worked obviously with domestic violence, sexual assault. I've worked with teens from competing war zones. And I've worked in spaces of incarceration. And so I come to these topics in through this like lens over the last 25 years of really experiencing a lot of ways in which humans can be traumatized. And I've learned a few things from that. Now, this training isn't your typical communication course. Like we're gonna think about things in a different way. And I'm hoping that this is one of those trainings that is so different that maybe you'll find something useful that you haven't heard before. This is a series of four. And so we have four trainings that kind of work together. The first one, which if you haven't had a chance to see, we did record it, so it's available for you to watch the recording. And I'm going to do a small recap of what we learned, but we learned about the body and the brain, and it's useful to understand what's happening to our nervous system as we're walking through this world, and our energy and how that energy changes and shifts, and how one moment you feel safe and then one other moment you don't necessarily feel safe, and what that does to our ability to connect with other human beings. Today, we're going to go into the world of forensic interviewing and figure out how we can use some of those techniques, right? I haven't defined forensic interviews, but I will in a few minutes. And then we're going to do some practical stuff, like how do we apply this knowledge more practically? And then and we'll have a couple of sessions where we're just being more practical in our learning, more group work kind of stuff. So just be aware that typically this particular training is a 40-hour training. And since it is so long, I'm taking some big ideas and reducing them down to a little less than 2 hours. I do think 2 hours is a long training. So just to give everybody like a moment to get up and move around and shake and grab some water and visit the restroom, we will do like a 10-minute break, kind of like around the middle. So you have that to look forward to. Now, just some nug work, right? Just some housekeeping in this space. It's a small group, and that's okay. I love small groups. This is a great opportunity for us to communicate with each other if we want to, right? Like you have the option to chat if you want to, get in the chat box. If I say something that you think is interesting, feel free to like comment or throw a resource in. We can have the emojis, you can throw your emojis on if you like. You can even unmute yourself if you like. It's totally up to you. I think that we also too, there might be some resources in this space, and if you want to have your cameras on, I definitely welcome having your cameras on. I think it makes a difference when there's faces to look at. It really helps. Someday I kind of fantasize about having a whole training where all of us have those Zoom emojis. We could have Zoom emojis. That would be kind of fun. I would volunteer to be the raccoon or the fox, in that space. But we can do lots of things. Now, one thing too, I just want you to know that there's no judgment if you're multitasking. Like I know that coloring, or painting or sculpting or doing some kind of art form, doing something with your hands while you're learning actually facilitates learning faster. So feel free to have a project working in the background. I know that you're still listening. It's just sometimes we need something to do, to discharge some of that nervous energy while we're learning. So don't feel like you have to just sit there like this. I know Zoom trainings are kind of awkward like that. So don't feel like that. Now, because I do work in criminal justice, sometimes it's hard to remove myself from that space. And I'm trying to reduce the examples of criminal justice, but I do have a couple in this training that are kind of criminal justice related. And so I'm going to keep that at a minimum, but I just want you to know that if you experience some feelings in this course, like if you're provoked or you're activated because of this course, I like to call them trauma echoes. I encourage you to write it down, to actually, kind of think to yourself, like, I just experienced a trauma echo in this training. My heart started to race. I started to feel a kind of way. It's useful to go back later and process through that. Like, you don't actually have to get stuck in your trauma echoes. There's a way for us to learn how to navigate and mitigate our way through, and that's through self-regulation, through working through our issues. A trauma echo, in many ways, like we learned in our last training, is really your body's early alarm system. Your body remembers your experiences. And so, for example, if you wrestled a tiger at some point in your life, your body is going to remember what that was like. It's going to remember what the tiger smelled like. It's going to remember what the tiger felt like. It's going to remember the sounds the tiger made. It's going to remember the emotions that rose during that particular moment. So then, as you're walking through life, if you smell the smell of the tiger, that's what a trauma echo is, right? That's what a trigger is. It's your body saying, hey, you remember that time we wrestled a tiger? I smell that. Do we need to prepare? Are we getting ready to go into battle? Is something happening right now? Right? Because your brain doesn't actually see the world. Your brain completely relies on your senses in order to experience the world. And this is important. And this is important, especially for this training. So I don't think trauma echoes or triggers are necessarily bad things. They're gifts. They're your body's way of helping you survive this complicated landscape. It's your body's inventory of all the battles that you've engaged in your life, and then helping you say, hey, maybe we're there again. Do we need to brace ourselves so we can survive it again? One of the ways that I like to navigate my trauma echoes is maybe by introducing a glimmer. Did you know a glimmer is the opposite of a trauma echo? It's something that smells good, that brings you back to a time and place where you felt safe, or a song, right? Where you felt joy, right? So we can do that. All right. So let's do a recap. Let's do a recap of what we learned. I'm not going to spend a lot of time recapping, but there's a few concepts that we talked about last time that are especially important for this. So I'm just going to go over it really quick. I'm going to spend like 10 minutes just remembering the last training that we had. If you haven't attended the last training, then this will give you a little bit of a foundation, but and maybe inspire you to go back and look at the other training. So the first one I just want to help you remember is the window of tolerance, right? Like sometimes when we're within our window of tolerance, we're grounded, we're alert, we're clear, we're engaged, we're calm, we're solid, right? We're in that space where we're feeling solid. And that's the place where we want to be. That's the place where we want to be when we're engaging in dialogue, when we're trying to connect with other human beings, where we're doing new skills, where we're learning things. We want to be within that window of tolerance. Now, sometimes our nervous system gets activated, right? So sometimes we get into that hyper arousal where we're agitated, we're stressed out. That's where panic lives. That's where high energy, where that's where irritable, distractive behavior, we're afraid. we have difficulty concentrating because we're up there in hyperarousal. And then sometimes it's the opposite, right? Where we go into hypoarousal, where we become very passive, we're shut down, we're numb to emotions. Maybe there's some depression happening in that space. We're very, very low energy. The ideal space is to be within that window of tolerance. And sometimes we have to reground, and sometimes we have to practice self-regulation to bring our energy to where it needs to be in that ideal space. Like if you're agitated and hyperarousal, that's where we start doing breathing exercises or tapping exercises or whatever grounding exercises that you can do. Later, I'll introduce a tool that can help you bring yourself down. But then if you're in hypoarousal, we have to re-energize. Sometimes we re-energize by just eating some protein or by getting up and shaking our hands and putting some movement into our space. We do something to bring energy into our bodies, to bring ourselves into that window of tolerance. And that's really useful for communication. And when we're able to self-regulate, then we can help somebody else co-regulate. We can co-regulate. We can help somebody by noticing they're agitated, they're in hyperarousal. Maybe we stop what we're doing and we go for a walk around the building, right? And we bring that energy down. Maybe we suggest some cold water. Would you like something cold to drink, right? Because that grounds the nervous system as well. So we do things like that. The next thing that I just want to throw out here, and this slide's a little bit hard to read if you have bad eyes, and feel free to take a screenshot of it too if you want to capture it to look at later. But I just want you to remember that memory is complicated, and there are different types of memory, and they light up in different parts of the brain. There's semantic memory, episodic memory, emotional memory, and procedural memory. And they're kind of broken off into two places. There's implicit memories, and then there's explicit memories. Now, from an interview perspective, we want to remember that memory is so complicated, and implicit memories come to us via our senses, right? Our eyes, our ears, our nose, our smells, the way that our body feels, things like that. And those ones are more solid memories. They are more they're more embedded in the brain, whereas explicit memories are more easily changed and they float away easier, right? And so we want to know the difference between what kind of memories have a staying power, if you will, that helps us in our communication. Now, last but not least, in our recap, I just want to remind you that the trauma echoes, not only are they a part of your own experience, right? Like there's a good chance many of you have had a lot of experiences that leave trauma echoes, right? Many of you have wrestled tigers and bears and snakes and wolves, and you've had all kinds of complicated experiences, and your body remembers those experiences in lots of different ways. So every single time you show up at the table with somebody, your whole history of your traumatic experiences comes with you, but also so does theirs. So if you're having a conversation and somewhere along the line in that conversation, the emotion, say, for example, shame rises, right? When shame comes to the table, you're not dealing with shame because of this conversation and this scenario, what's happening right now. It's shame, a lifetime. All of the shame that this person has ever felt in their life comes at that particular moment. That's why sometimes people overreact to things, because when anger rises, it's not anger because of this one moment, it's the lifetime of anger. A lot of trauma echoes attach themselves is part of those complicated emotions, right? And sometimes we trip over each other's trauma echoes when we're having conversations with each other. We overreact or underreact because we're experiencing this moment in time in the context of our experiences with all moments of time. So it's actually really interesting, and I think it's fascinating how our history shapes even a moment just like having conversation. I love this quote. Maybe the most difficult part of being traumatized is dealing with the triggers that reside within. All right, so let's go ahead and move forward. The first thing is with the trauma-informed forensic interview, one of the things that we really wanted to illustrate was what a forensic interview is. And so what we call what how we like to frame our interview is we want our interviews to be human centric, right? So first, let's start by defining a forensic interview. Now, this is one of the examples from criminal justice because this technique comes from criminal justice. So I'm going to show a clip from a television show. This is a television show called Unbelievable. And what's happening in this clip is somebody has just been assaulted, right? This young girl has been assaulted. Somebody broke into her house in the middle of the night and assaulted her while she was sleeping. And she's trying to tell law enforcement, but she's confused because it was a really confusing experience because she was super traumatized and the brain does what the brain does, right? So she's trying to tell them what happened, but some of the things are not adding up. And which is normal, right? That's normal for things to get complicated in moments like this. And so as she's telling this experience, this is what happens. So this is what a forensic interview is. This is what the police are doing in this moment. They're interviewing her.
So let's start at the beginning. Before the assault.
Can you tell me everything that happened?
Honey, you need to be more specific.
I know this is hard, but I need to ask you some questions about what happened.
Marie, you need to know.
I just want to go over the incident once more.
Sorry, we need it for our records. But I already told you everything.
You're sure?
I don't, it's confusing. I wanted to go home, and they just kept asking me the same question over and over again. How come your story doesn't add up? How come people don't believe you?
Start at the beginning.
I'm pretty positive that it happened.
Pretty positive or positive?
No signs of forced entry, no DNA, not a single neighbor saw or heard a thing.
You think Marie made up the attack?
What is this? This is not what you just said.
Maybe I blacked it out.
Police haven't shared any information except to say the claims she made were in fact fabricated.
Why would you do that? Why would you freak us out like that?
It's sick is what it is. You're sick, you are.
Police say a masked assailant broke in while the victim was sleeping.
I told the truth the first time.
You're saying that was true?
So why did you tell the police it wasn't?
Even with good people, if the truth is inconvenient, they don't believe it. No matter how much someone says they care about you, they just don't.
All right, so with the forensic interview, this is the process where law enforcement, or sometimes there's forensic interviewers, they sit down with somebody who has just experienced crime victimization and they try to gather the experience for the process of the criminal justice system, right? Because we want to get as much of the experience as we possibly can, so then that way investigators can take the information and investigate it, right? And look for it. Now, one of the problems with like what happened in this case, because in this case, this was actually a real case, it's actually pretty normal, is sometimes when we're trying to ask each other about an experience, we rely on who, what, when, where, why, and what, right? Remember back in the day when we learned how to write papers and, we would learn things and we learned things like we learned how to talk to each other by asking who did it and what happened and what was it? The who, what, when, where, why, what type stuff. And sometimes H, right? Sometimes how. Like we learned those questions. But what we found is that that's not actually true to being a human being. And so back in 2009, my husband created an interview modality that really changed criminal justice in the United States in a lot of ways. Like he really was very successful in inspiring a lot of change. And since then, all these different things have come out of being human centric. And so, or people have learned how to interview differently. And I started taking some of the technique that he used and applying them in different ways. And you can still use the same forensic interview technique just for communicating. And the outcome is really, really great. So I wanted to share that with you all. First and foremost, it means that we're human centric. We remember we're all human beings here, all of us. You're a human, the people you're talking to are human, and humans are very complicated in a lot of different ways. We take in information based off of our own experience. We're riddled with emotions. Emotions are normal. And sometimes we feel scared, sometimes we feel angry, sometimes we feel emotions that we don't even have words for, right? So we have to remember that. So the principles of this technique, of the principles of this type of communication, is first and foremost is practicing empathy and compassion. Like, we always want to root in that compassionate lens, giving the benefit of the doubt. If we need to err, we're going to err on the side of compassion. We want to create genuine connection. Now, the way that I'm defining genuine connection is the same way that Brene Brown defines genuine connection, and that's by cultivating this ability to measure how we're impacting each other. Like, for example, when you are talking to somebody, do you, in that dialogue, do you feel seen? Do you feel valued? Do you feel heard? Right? Like, that would be a source of connection. When you walk away from that dialogue, do you receive strength? And are you sustained by that connection? Like, do you feel stronger because of that connection you had with another person? That's what connection is. It's about being seen, valued, and heard. It's about not feeling judged. It's about receiving strength and sustenance from that connection. Obviously, good communication has mutual trust. Like, we trust each other to be honest. We trust each other to be vulnerable in these spaces. It's collaborative. Like, we're going to work together under a set of ground rules that is very useful. We're going to be considerate of our needs of each other. Like, we're going to notice when one of us needs a break. We're going to notice when emotions rise. We're not going to be afraid of emotions. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad. Crying is actually really good for you. Like, all of those, we're not going to shy away from emotions. We're just going to be considerate of them, right? Like, if we're going to go into a dialogue where there's a potential of emotions rising, we're just going to have tissue available. We're going to have cold water available. We're going to have a blanket available, things to bring comfort in that space available, right? We're going to function in transparency and honesty, and we're going to hold ourselves accountable in this space. Um, Now, I've kind of tossed around dialogue a few times, and I just want to throw that out here because this is going to be the kingpin of what we're doing here. A debate is when we're trying to win a disagreement. A debate is looking for holes. It's stressed in nature. It's argumentative. There's a right way. There's a wrong way. In a debate, we're going to use silence as a weapon. We're going to completely reject feelings. In a discussion, we're going to present ideas. We're going to seek answers or solutions. Discussions still are persuasive and team building, right? Like, when we're discussing, we're still trying to create like a faction. We're trying to get people to back us up in this space. In a discussion, we're still trying to achieve our goals. We're avoiding silence. We're avoiding our feelings. In a dialogue, dialogues are a little bit different, right? Dialogue, we actually embrace the feelings of the space. We're trying to understand. We're going into that space seeking understanding. In a dialogue, we're challenging our worldview, which is much different than a debate or a discussion. Can you imagine going into a conversation where you're like, man, I hope my worldview is challenged, right? Or, gosh, this might be an opportunity for one of my implicit biases to be changed and to evolve, right? We're looking for difference of opinion. We're looking for common ground. We're hoping to broaden our perspective. If empathy isn't there, we're going to create empathy and we're going to expand compassion, right? So when we're talking dialogue, this is what we're talking about. And this is a great slide to take a photo of or a screenshot of because this really changes the way we even enter into a connection with another human. The next thing we really need is courage. And so I'm going to bring Simon Sinek in here to talk about the courage it takes to have hard conversations.
Here's a question I get fairly often, which is how to have uncomfortable conversations. As you know, I talk about the importance of human skills. Cats don't have to work very hard to be cats. It comes pretty naturally to them. But for us as human beings, we actually have to work very hard to be human. And one of those human skills that we need to practice is how to have uncomfortable conversations. Being uncomfortable is part of being human. And sometimes discomfort is caused by something we have with another person, whether professionally or personally. There is a tension that causes discomfort. Now, there are many ways to respond to that discomfort. We can run away from it. That is an option. Avoidance is always an option. I don't think it's the best option because then it just perpetuates the discomfort or breaks relationships. The better way to deal with it is to lean into the tension. Now, there are also multiple ways to lean into tension. If you want to have a confrontation with someone, if you want to lean into that tension and have an uncomfortable conversation, too often when we don't have the skill set, it gets worse. And it explodes and becomes an argument and sometimes also ends in a destroyed relationship. So the skill of having an uncomfortable conversation is essential. This is how I do them. In fact, I just had one recently with a friend and it went like this. I need to have an uncomfortable conversation with you. By stating what's about to happen, it lets the person take a deep breath and know what's about to happen is leaning into tension. It also lets them be prepared and be a little less defensive. If you don't trust your skills on how to have an uncomfortable conversation, then say something like this. I need to have an uncomfortable conversation with you. I'm afraid of having this conversation because I'm afraid that I'll say the wrong thing or it'll come out the wrong way and make things worse. So please be patient with me as I try to fumble through this and get out what I need to tell you. But it's more important to me that I have this conversation with you and try and address this situation than avoid it, because this relationship matters to me and I want to go through this with you. Can we have that conversation? And I always do that. I always ask permission. Can we have that conversation? Can I have this conversation with you now? Because they may not be in the mindset for it. They may say, yes, I want to have this conversation, but can we have it in an hour, right? So as opposed to being sprung on them. So I have to have an uncomfortable conversation with you. Can I have it now? Yes. Okay. Now you want to engage in something called FBI. It's just a mnemonic. You can do it in any order, but you have to have all three. Your feelings, the behavior that made you feel that way, and the potential impact if the behavior doesn't change. Be as specific as you can. Feelings. Do better than happy, sad, angry. I'm really frustrated, or I was put on edge, or I'm feeling distant from you, or I'm uncomfortable because. Then label the behavior that they did that made you feel that way. And again, be really, really specific. Avoid things like you always ... because they'll tell you the one time that they didn't and now you're backpedaling. Pick the most egregious or the most recent one and talk about that situation and how whatever they did made you feel a certain way, and your fear that if that continues or if it's not goes unaddressed, that something will happen. Maybe, there'll always be tension between us and the relationship will break. And that's exactly what I did with my friend. It's a relatively new friend. Something happened that made it uncomfortable. I said, I need to have an uncomfortable conversation with you. Just fumble through this with me. I don't want to, but this relationship matters to me, and so I want to have this conversation. I addressed what the situation was, and then I said, my fear is that if you and I don't lean into this now, that this little friendship, this sprouting of a friendship that we're having will get destroyed, and I would actually rather see it grow. And we had a very uncomfortable conversation, and it turned out to be fantastic because we ended up opening up to each other and revealing various insecurities and fears that were both triggered by each other. And it was just fantastic. And the relationship is even better now than it was before. So please, please, please practice and learn the skill of having uncomfortable conversations. And the way you're going to practice them is by actually having them.
By actually having them. That's the first step, right? It's really interesting how the internet has changed the world. It's like the implications of the internet have changed the world in so many different ways, and so many ways that are so powerful and so inspirational. Like we're as a human family, we're evolving quite quickly on an intellectual level because we have more access to information than we've ever had. I mean, even look at this space. We have people in different parts parts of the world coming together to learn how to have hard conversations. I think that's extraordinary. But one of the things that comes from the internet is that some of our ability to communicate has deteriorated a little bit. There are some indicators that empathy is going down and that we're not connecting as well with other human beings, like heart to heart connection. It's not happening as easily as it used to because we don't have as much connection with each other because of the technology. So it's obviously there's always going to be things that are really, really cool and things that are like meh, like kind of mid, like that's okay, I guess. And then there's things that are just not good. And there are some things not good about technology, but we can revitalize them. And so one of them is just one, having conversations. Learning how to have them actually takes some courage because there's some vulnerability associated with having hard conversations. Sometimes your own feelings are on the line, and sometimes your own biases, your own idea of how things should be, get in the way. One of the things when it comes to interviewing and when we're trying to connect with other humans is we really want to be empathetic in that space. We want to really work hard to listen to understand, right? Like we want to focus on right now and we want to listen radically, right? Like there is nothing more important than what the person is saying in front of you. Sometimes we have a tendency in our listening skills to listen to reply, right? I've noticed this a lot as a professional people watcher. I love watching people. I love going to like crowded spaces and just watching people, or going to a party and finding myself like a nice chair in the corner and just watching the dynamics happen. One of my favorite things to watch is two people having a conversation, because sometimes you can actually see people listening to each other, but sometimes you can see people just waiting for their opportunity to speak. So what that looks like, which I think is fun to watch, is you have somebody and they're telling a story, and they're talking, telling a story, and someone's listening. There's always this moment where this person lens and they have something to say, right? So now they're ready to talk. And this person's still talking. And this person's like jumping in, trying to get a word in edgewise, but this person's still talking. Maybe this person pauses and takes a drink of water, right? And in that pause, this person jumps in and they start talking, right? But what's really interesting is they've been waiting to talk for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So what they bring to the table is usually something that this person said 10 minutes ago, but they've already moved on. But this person didn't notice that they moved on because this whole time they've been waiting for their chance to talk. Now, this person, while this person is talking, they weren't done talking yet. They just paused to get a drink of water. So now they're waiting for their chance to have a conversation. And when this person pauses, they jump in and they start talking. And then the same thing. This one wasn't done talking yet. It's really fascinating. If you watch this long enough, sometimes you end up with two people who are having two completely different conversations. Like they've veered off. They're no longer talking to each other. They're both just waiting for their turn to talk, but they're talking about completely different things, but neither one of them has noticed that the other person is not on the same page with them because they're both so focused on their chance to talk. It's fascinating. Neither one of them are listening, really. They're not listening. And I see that so frequently that I just find it amusing. And I think it's really interesting to watch two people have completely different conversations next to each other. And then I like to watch the ending, because they usually end with, "It was really nice talking to you." That's my favorite part. "Yeah, it was nice talking to you too." And then they walk away, but neither of them were enriched by the other, right? Because both of them just spent their time felt self-focused. Listening is actually an art form. And this strategy of communication is hyper focused on the art of listening. So let me define that. I've got one more video and then we're going to start moving into some of the how to do this. But the first part is really that art of listening. This is the most important part.
So listening is not the act of hearing the words spoken. It is the art of understanding the meaning behind those words. And
when people say you're not listening to me and we simply parrot back the words that they were said, congratulations, your ears work. That is the act. That is the act of listening. But the art of listening is creating an environment in which the other person feels heard. Now you notice what I said there. The other person, and I used an emotional word, feels, right? I don't want to know that you heard the words. I want to feel heard. I want to feel seen. I want to feel understood. And that is a learnable, practicable skill. So there are many parts of it. It's things like replacing judgment with curiosity, right? That's a hard thing to do. We're a pretty judgy group, right? To be curious why someone has a point of view. It's creating a safe space for someone to, as my friend Dia Khan calls it, empty the bucket. So even if we find what they're saying just reprehensible, right? You're never going to be able to actually have dialogue until at least one of the parties gets the opportunity to say everything without judgment. And as she calls it, emptying the bucket. And once somebody feels like they've completely said everything, then they're more apt to listen to you. But usually what we do is we defend, or we litigate, or we interrupt. We point out flaws in logic, which is just frustrating. And when you point out some flaws in somebody's logic, because we're all imperfect when we speak, and we all choose the wrong words at various times. And that's not what I meant. You know what I meant, is what we have to say. Well, if you know what you meant, then why don't you say what you... You can see how this spirals. But it's things like when somebody says something, and there's really easy ways to do it. Things like, go on, tell me more. What else? And they keep talking. And you go quiet, they feel the space. And tell me more. Go on. And eventually, it's all out. And then there's a safe space for you to respond and express yourself in a constructive way. But that's correct. We do not teach listening, and listening is the way to create to build trust with someone. You make someone feel heard, they'll trust you. It is the way to find common ground in opposition, in simple cases in business, but in more complicated cases in national politics, or in global politics, or in war. Why do William Ury, who wrote Getting to Yes, he talks about the same thing. He goes, we have talk shows, but we don't have listen shows. He says we have peace talks, but what we really need is peace listens. And he, who's been at the table at the highest levels of peace negotiations, he said people show up and start demanding what they want, and that's how the negotiations begin. Nobody starts by saying, so tell me why you came here. There's a great documentary that I recommend to learn this. It's called White Right, Meeting the Enemy by Dia Khan. In a nutshell, Dia is a Muslim woman living in the UK who was trolled by white supremacists to the point where the police got involved because her life was at risk. They told her stay away from open windows. That's how bad it got. The way Dia responded was by moving to the United States and going to meet the white supremacists. And she brought her cameras. I mean, you can see it all happen in this documentary. And basically, she gave them a safe space to feel heard. Now, that sounds mad. Like, why should she give them a safe space to feel heard? They should give her a safe space. Yeah, fine, good. It's never going to happen. Dia sits down with these white supremacists, and she gives them a safe space to feel heard. It's extreme listening. And I say it's extreme because, they hate her, They don't just disagree with her. They want her off the planet. And she lets them empty their bucket, as she calls it. And then conversation begins. And because they feel heard, they start to trust her. And as they start to trust her, she becomes a friend. And then it creates this paradox where I'm supposed to hate this woman, but I trust her and consider her a friend. And what you see is one by one, these white supremacists, these diehard white supremacists, start dropping out of the movement because they can no longer reconcile their beliefs with reality. And if it can happen in this extreme environment, then it can happen anywhere. And all that is required for us to cross political divides or disagreements at work and things like that is one of the parties has to learn how to listen. It doesn't even require both parties to learn the skill. That's the amazing thing. And it is one of the most remarkable skills that anyone can learn, the power of listening, yeah. So the documentary is a great extreme example of what it can do.
All right, so the art of listening, right? Extreme listening, listening to the point where somebody can completely empty their bucket. That's a really unusual thing to happen in spaces. And that's what we want to do in a forensic interview, right? In forensic interview, we really try hard to have extreme listening. And we also do a few other things too. And this is kind of the vibe. This is the vibe. This is where we start thinking about like, okay, what is the foundation for for this specific communication? Obviously, we want to be human-centered, and we talked about what that means to us. We want to understand that each human responds to trauma in distinct ways. Like each human is bringing trauma to the conversation, to the dialogue, and their response to that is different, right? It's totally unique. Each person is experiencing the world around them in unique ways. We want to initiate genuine human connection before the dialogue, during the dialogue, after the dialogue. So we're always engaged, we're always connected, we're always trying to hear what the person is trying to say. We're pausing afterwards, so then that way we can make sure that we're ingesting what we need to ingest from that conversation. We're incorporating stress and stress mitigation and calming techniques as they're needed, which means that if someone is hyper aroused, then we're giving them the space to come back down. If someone's in hypo arousal, we might like take a pause and walk around the building or shake a little bit to bring the energy back up. We're trying to understand the experience of the person that we're talking to. That's the most important part. We are really working hard to understand the experience. And the experience is the key word, right? And we're really going to focus on that word throughout this. And then, of course, you know, in criminal justice, we document a lot. So we're going to document it in a cool way. But then we're going to have like after services. Like if someone during dialogue discloses something hard and painful, then, you know, we check in the next day and hey, you know, like that was a tough conversation. How do you feel afterwards? So we talk about, you know, we check in. We don't just let people hang out there in their sadness, right? We continue that connection until the human being in front of us is reconnected. The purpose of the interview, and this is the purpose of this conversation, that's what we're really getting at. The purpose is to understand the human experience. Now, for us, we're not going to document it, but you might be in a position where you're documenting, right? Like maybe you're working in human resources and you need to document. Maybe you have a caseload, right? And this training is useful for you because you're navigating a caseload. Or maybe you have staff that you're working with or employees, or maybe you're not navigating difficult conversations with your supervisor and you're documenting. So there's might be a few times where you're documenting, but the goal is to understand that human experience from the human's perspective, not from our perspective. We're not trying to put our perspective on top of their experience. We're trying to hear it from their experience and completely from their experience. Even sometimes if they say hard things that we don't agree with, right? Even then dialogues have that sometimes. There are moments in dialogue where you're talking to somebody who has completely different political viewpoints, or maybe, you know, they see the world so radically different than you do. And maybe some of the ways that they see the world or things that they're articulating you find stressful, right? We don't have to get engaged in that stress and we don't have to cut them off. We can simply say, that's interesting. Tell me more about your perspective, right? When you tell somebody what they're saying is interesting and you want to hear more about their perspective, that isn't you agreeing with them. That's you simply admitting that they are complicated human beings and you're going to hear them out. Right. And when we practice that art of listening and we let somebody completely empty their bucket, sometimes that process in and of itself changes their perspective because it is really rare for people to be able to completely empty their bucket. So it's really fascinating how even just being able to do that is enough for somebody to say, well, you know, now that I said that out loud, I'm not sure about it anymore. It's really interesting. You are trying to understand their experience within all the other experiences that they've had in their life, right? Because keep in mind, your brain doesn't separate experiences, it integrates them, it combines them. It's quite common to be talking to somebody about an experience. Like maybe you're asking them about their last vacation. Tell me about Disneyland. And we start like that. We start just very broad. Tell me about your last vacation. And they might start talking about, like, oh, I went to Disneyland and it was really fun with my family and we went on all these rides. But honestly, like, I like this other amusement park better. Or, honestly, I don't really like amusement parks. I like going to the beach. We went to the beach last year and that was so much fun, right? So now it's like you've tapped into this category of family vacations and they're kind of weaving through all of the different ones inside their brain. Maybe it even goes off in another direction where they're just like, 2 years ago, I went to the beach, and while I was at the beach, I got sand in my shoes, and I really hated that feeling of sand in my shoes. So I ended up buying new shoes. And these are the kind of shoes that I bought, and it kind of leads into lots of different directions. When we let somebody completely empty their bucket, they usually do circle back around to the front, but it's honoring that real experience of the human brain because that's how human brains work, right? So we want to really remember that. Now, the way that we have this mapped out is by using prompts and cues. Prompting is whenever the interviewer is doing the thinking, right? Because there are sometimes we do want specific information, and a cue is when the interviewee is doing the thinking. That's kind of how we like mapped it out, right? A cue is more open-ended, and a prompt is more like, let me clarify, let me get some specific information about this, right? Because sometimes we do need specific things and we need to dig deeper in this one specific area, right? So we're going to really start off with cues, but we're going to use prompts as an opportunity to move forward. Now, this next slide, this is the whole technique. So you can feel free to take a picture of this if you like. This is how we teach criminal justice to interview people who've experienced something complicated. And this is victims of crime, people who are witnesses to crime, and people who are suspects or defendants of crime. We use the same method no matter what. So if you'll notice, we have it on two different sections. The first one is the cues and the prompts. The prompts are like clarifying, right? Like, because sometimes we do need more information, like, tell me more about the car. Like maybe there was a reference to a car. And so we're looking as investigators, we want to know more about the car because we want to find the car, right? So it's like they're talking about, and then we got in the car and then we drove to the car and we were driving here and we're driving there, and they're telling us maybe their story is rooted in driving. And so we want to find the car. Tell me more about the car. And that's it. Tell me more about the car. And then we let them tell us what they know about the car. We're not going to ask them weird things like, what was the license plate? Because that might not be something that they know about, right? If they know the license plate, then they worked hard to know the license plate and they'll tell us. So that's how prompts work. Help me understand this particular moment. Notice that, or notice when you said this, or notice that moment. What did that feel like? Or what did that smell like, right? How did you react in this particular moment? Cues are just simple and open-ended. We always start with the same one. What are you able to share about your experience? Maybe you're talking to somebody about their holiday. Tell me about your holiday. That's it. Just tell me about your vacation. When we ask who, what, when, where, why questions, then that's all we get. Where did you go? Disneyland. Who did you go with? My brother. What did it look like? It was super colorful. It was raining that day, right? How did you get there? We got there on a bus. So we really limit the information we get. Phrases to avoid. Tell me everything. It's impossible to tell anybody everything about everything, right? Like that's really hard. Yes or no questions are very limited. Why? Why did you do that? Why? Why did you do that? Right? Like we can get to the whys, but we have to do it in a non-judgmental way. Why in and of itself can be very judgy. Why did you choose to wear that? Why did you choose to go in that direction? Right? If we want to understand the why, we might ask something like, Tell me more about that moment. Help me understand this particular choice, right? And we're doing it in a non-judgmental way. Like, we really legitimately are interested. Help me understand your choice in that moment, right? We're trying to get the context of the situation. We don't want to know what happened next. Sequence doesn't always work, right? Our brain isn't patterned like that. We don't ever want to say, are you sure that happened? Or how would you explain this, right? And then, of course, there are some actions to avoid: leading questions, close-ended questions, compound questions, multiple choices, judging, paraphrasing, confrontational questions, interrupting. We definitely want pausing. We don't want hypothesizing or sequencing or rushing, right? So this is like a good little like cue card to hold on to for this. So let's see, this is a good time for a break. This is our 10-minute break. We're going to go into this break, and then we're going to go into these prompts, and we're going to practice with some of them. And we're going to kind of look at some of the information, how it comes out differently, because it's a different way to talk. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a 10-minute break, and when this timer is over, we're going to come back immediately. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We have about an hour left. We're halfway through, and we're going to go ahead and get started with really looking at this technique, right? So one of the things about forensic interviewing that I really appreciate is it's not about creating a dialogue where you get to influence another person's experience. It's about photographing it. Like when we're training police officers, we tell them you're not painters, you're photographers. This is a place for you to just gather the experience, completely untouched by you, right? You're just photographing it. Maybe you're looking for opportunities to get engaged in the dialogue, but you're really just photographing the experience. We're not going to just focus on just the facts, right? The facts of a conversation are the most boring things. Those are the things that are the who, what, when, where, why type stuff. And we don't want to focus on just the facts. We don't want to know what time things happened, who did what, how it was happening, where exactly things took place, what people were wearing. We don't want to know things like that. That's not useful in understanding somebody's very human experience. We want to encourage this opportunity for people to not know the answer to things. Like, I don't know is a perfectly reasonable and wonderful answer to something, right? Like, we don't want to create a world where people have to guess at things. I don't know is a perfect answer. And then we also want to practice the pause. Now, I want to talk about the pause for just a second. Pausing in a dialogue is really powerful. Like it's this multi-tool. It's super awkward. Let me just throw that out here. It is super, super awkward, but it is so useful. When you're asking somebody about their experience, there's oftentimes when they dive into that memory, they go into the memory so deeply, and it's almost like they're exploring the inside of their head. They sometimes are not even looking directly at you, which is fine. It's not fun. It doesn't matter. Someone doesn't have to hold your eye contact. I mean, culturally, some cultures are all about eye contact, some are not, right? But when somebody is processing through and digging through a memory, sometimes they kind of look off to the side. Sometimes you can even see their eyes moving as they're kind of navigating. One thing that we want to know about memories is memories are quite complicated. I like to think of memories like a cluster of grapes. Maybe when you pull on one, like see the little number one, you pull on that memory. Oftentimes that memory is attached to other things, and you start pulling on it. And as you pull, you're pulling more and more of the cluster out, and you're getting more and more pieces of the memory that are actually in different places. So I want to show a video about memories and how memories work, because it's so useful to understand how the brain consolidates memories and why this communication method works so well.
How can someone experience something terrible like sexual abuse and not remember it for years, even decades? To answer that question, we need to understand how memory works. Let's say that while relaxing in your backyard, your mom accidentally spills a cold and sticky drink all over you. Your brain encodes the feeling of cold liquid on your skin, the smell of your backyard, and other details into short-term memory. Then, through a process called consolidation, transforms them into long-term memory that you can retrieve or not retrieve later. But an entire memory doesn't get stored away in one package in some compartment in the brain. Instead, different pieces of an experience are stored in different areas of the brain. Images here, sounds there, body sensations and smells there and there. The brain also creates connections between pieces of memory that are stored as patterns of connection in another part of the brain. Images of the drink flying through the air, sensations of cold liquid on your skin, the tension in your body as you jump up in shock. All of these are connected in your brain along with the images of your backyard. Years later, when you're relaxing in the yard and someone stumbles a bit while walking by with a drink, some combination of those pieces of memory could pop back into your head. In other words, that older experience was queued up because the connection of those experiences in your brain triggered the retrieval of those memory pieces into your awareness. Now that we have a basic understanding of how memory works, we can begin to explore the following questions. What is happening when all or some of the pieces of memory are prevented from being retrieved for years or even decades? And under what conditions can some memory pieces finally be retrieved into awareness? The answers to those questions help us understand what have been called repressed and recovered memories.
All right. So one of the things, what we're talking about is to see how the brain like shuffled through and had all of those memories connected in that sort of way, right? Now, sometimes when we're thinking about thinking or talking to another human being, we're trying to gather that experience in this way, right? We're trying to put all the pieces to a puzzle together. When we're trying to hear someone's experience, say about their vacation, maybe what it was like to ride a roller coaster, we almost kind of go in having that expectation that they're going to be able to share every piece of this memory puzzle, but oftentimes some of those pieces are missing or even gone. Your brain doesn't capture every little thing about every experience. We have central details, things that we are focused on during an experience, and we have things that we're simply not focused on. And on the back end of our brain is connected to all kinds of other things. Like we have all the times we went to the beach are kind of connected in the back of our memories. All the times we went to different amusement parks are connected. Vacation category, trauma categories, friendship categories, and sometimes those things overlap. When we're asking about vacation with friends, that taps into both vacation category and friends category, which is smells and sights and thoughts and feelings and music and all these things that we can hear. It's all connected. And so when we use this technique and we give that power of the pause, that gives an opportunity for the person to kind of go through all of the different connections and find information that's relevant to what they want to talk about. When we're teaching interviewing to audience members, one of the things we do in our 40-hour class is we break people off into groups and we have them practice interviewing each other. We do that multiple times during a full interview course, and one of the exercises is centered around the pause, one of the first exercises, and they get these little sand timers that are like 30 seconds. And so when they give someone a prompt and they're interviewing somebody and then that person stops talking, we ask them to turn the sand timer over, and they're not allowed to ask their next prompt for a full 30 seconds. It's super awkward. But once they get in a habit of allowing for that pause and allowing for a person to process through their memories, it's really fascinating how much more information arises from that experience. Now, we're very transparent during an interview. We let the person know, like, there might be moments where we're pausing because we just want to ensure that you're completely emptying the bucket, that you're saying everything that you want to say. But what is really interesting is when you're talking to somebody and you're letting them have this pause and you're letting them process through, they are not the ones who feel the awkwardness of the silence. They're busy processing through a memory, right? They don't even notice the pause. They're still thinking. They're just like, well, this is how it felt. And there's other information and they're pulling at it and they're working. They don't even notice the awkwardness. It's you as the person who's listening that feels awkward, that feels that need to fill that space. So don't worry about it. Just pause and let them empty their bucket in that particular moment. Now we're asking very simple, open-ended questions. We're trying to reduce the number of words in our prompts and in our cues, right? So let's kind of go over some of the let's go over the prompts first, because we always kind of just want to know specific things about things. Like that's just part of the normal human experience. We love to clarify information, right? When you're trying to get to the context of the situation, or you're trying to understand somebody's decision, right? Or you just want to hear more about this moment in time, then we can use the clarifying prompts. Help me understand your thoughts when. And remember to keep your tone very empathetic. Like you don't want to say, help me understand your thoughts when you did this, right? That's aggressive. We want to have it be more along the lines of, help me understand your thoughts when this moment in time happened. Or when this happened, tell me more about that. Or help me understand driving away. Like they might say something like, and then I just drove away. Well, help me understand driving away. What, if anything, are you able to remember about clothes or the car or the face, like whatever it is you're trying to get a prompt, right? You can even reduce the prompt to something very small, like, tell me more about that. Or what are you able to remember in that particular moment? Just simplify, right? What are you able to share about your experience? This is how we always in the forensic interview world start. But in a normal dialogue, what are you able to tell me about your experience is a perfectly great way to start the conversation. What are you able to tell me about your holiday? Right? Or tell me about your holiday. You can simplify it all the way down, right? And just that's it. What are you able to tell me about your experience? And then just stop talking and let them talk until they totally empty their bucket. When they stop talking, pause and let them process. When they're completely done with a thought, there's always this moment when they're like done and then they look at you like they're processing, and then they do this head bounce and they look at you. Through body language, we'll know like, okay, they're ready for more information. Now, some of the things that we encourage people to use is sensory data. These are my favorite ways to talk to humans about their experiences, and they are a little bit strange. But they bring out some really interesting information. So I'm not going to show the whole video. I'm going to show a part of this video, just the lead up. I don't want to traumatize you through a training, especially a training that's not for criminal justice. You'll be able to fill in the blank spaces yourself, but we'll kind of lead up to this. What's happening in this video, this is a television clip from the show Mad Men. This is a couple and they're engaged to be married, and she works in this office, right? And she's showing her fiance the office, and they go into her boss's office, and he's really jealous of her boss. You know, her boss has a lot of power, a lot of money, and a lot of control over her life, and he doesn't like her boss. He's jealous of her. So he wants to have an intimate moment in the office, and she doesn't want to. So he forces it. Basically, he sexually assaults her in the office. Now, I'm not going to go all the way to the sexual assault, so we'll kind of build into it. But I just wanted you to see what the office looked like, and then I'll show you how to use some of the sensory data based off of what the office looks like.
Let me get my purse.
Fix me a drink, will you?
I don't know.
You know what these guys do all day? I've seen the movies. Pretend like I'm your boss. Donald Draper.
Okay, one drink.
All right, so he starts pushing in this particular area. We don't need to watch this because it's not relevant. But one thing that I think is really interesting about this clip, and one of the reasons why we use it in criminal justice, is because when the actual assault is happening, the camera pans to her eyes and what she can see in that moment, right? In that moment of the assault, this is what she can see. And so when we ask questions like, what did it look like? She's going to be able to describe the underneath part of the table. She's going to be able to describe the legs of the chair. She's going to be able to describe that one leaf of the plant, right? This is what her perspective is seeing. That's why we ask these sensory-based questions, because we remember that your brain doesn't actually have an experience with the world. Your brain relies on your eyes, your ears, your nose, your hands, your mouth. Actually, there's more than 50 different ways that your brain interacts with the world around it. Like we focus on the 5 primary senses, but there's actually way more than that. And some of the prompts are designed around some of the things like equilibrium, and how your body felt, things like that. but we definitely ask sensory-based questions. Now, to give you an example from criminal justice that I thought was really interesting, we were doing a training with law enforcement, and this one police officer in particular, he was one of the New York Police Department's police officers. So he was from the NYPD, and he didn't really buy this. Like he was kind of just like, this training is a woo-woo kind of training. Like, well, I'm not into it at all. But then he responded to a crime scene where somebody had set off an explosion in a hospital. And he wasn't getting anywhere. Like all the witnesses, nobody saw anything. He wasn't getting anywhere. And he was kind of getting desperate for information. And he kind of just threw up his hands. He's just like, fine, I'm gonna try it. Like I got nothing left to lose in this particular moment. Like he was getting ready to give up. And so he asked one of the witnesses, begrudgingly, he said, "What, if anything, could you smell?" And the guy, he immediately like went off to the side. Because the police officer described it, he said, just like you said, his head went off to the side and his eyes were moving back and forth. And he said, I could smell gasoline. I could smell gasoline. And he goes, there was this guy, and the smell was coming from this guy. He was drinking orange juice, but then he got the orange juice and he was pouring the orange juice all over the ground. And I remember thinking, that's weird that that guy is pouring his orange juice all over the ground. And he's just like, so it was weird, but I could smell gasoline. And so that was tangible. That was something that he could work with. Like he went back on scene and he looked for an orange juice container. And it turns out that the guy who had set off the explosions also wanted to establish a fire. So he put gasoline in the orange juice container and he was pouring gasoline from the orange juice container. Now, the guy could have said, I saw some guy pouring orange juice on the ground, and nobody's going to take that seriously. But as soon as he said, I smelled gasoline and I saw someone pouring from an orange juice container, they went and found it in the rubbish. And there was fingerprints all over the orange juice container. And through that, they were able to solve the case, right? Because nobody asks prompts like that. What could you smell? What could you hear? To give another example, at some point in my career, I decided that I wanted to do something more inspiring. Working in criminal justice sometimes is hard. So I thought, I'm going to use these techniques and I'm going to write a book about some really cool experiences. And I thought I'm going to interview women about birthing and what it's like birthing, because I was thinking the miracle of human life and how cool would it be to use this in the birthing processes. I was so naive. Honestly, like it wasn't great. All I learned from that experience, after interviewing 15 women, all I learned from that experience was that the hospital needs to be trauma informed, that they are kind of pushing people into these birthing scenarios that are not always great, right? And so it wasn't the best thing ever, but I did learn a lot of cool things. And one of the examples that I really that came from that smell prompt is I was interviewing this lady about her birthing experience. And I said, what, if anything, do you remember smelling, while she was giving birth? And she tilted her head and she was thinking and thinking and thinking. And then she goes, ugh. And her whole face just crunched. And she goes, I could smell my husband's breath. He was drinking. And then she went on this big thing. She's just like, when I went into labor, I had to take a taxi cab to the hospital, and my husband went to the bar instead. Like I went to the hospital by myself. I had to check myself in. I had to fill in all of the paperwork. I had to be there all alone while my husband was at the bar. And when he did show up, he was wasted. So I'm giving birth and he's breathing on me and he's drunk and he's making a fool of himself. And I'm trying to navigate that while I'm giving birth. And then she said, that was the moment that I decided that I was going to divorce him. And then she looked up and she goes, but I didn't realize that was the moment until like months later. Like it took her down this whole rabbit hole of how in that moment, all these things were happening and the levels of disrespect that she felt in that moment, right? She was trying to give birth, but this is how she was giving birth. She got this through that breath brought this whole context of the situation. Like it changed the image, the experience of her birthing changed completely by this prompt, right? Because most of the time when people give birth, they're thinking of that moment that you get to connect with your child and your baby and it's all warm and fuzzy. You kind of forget a lot of the other details. But all this brought it all back, right? And it wasn't something she had ever thought about before because we forget a lot of these things. The sights and the smells, those are implicit memories. And sometimes we don't remember implicit memories, but they're some of the most rich part. They're the richest part of the memories because they get really encoded. They encode very well because they're part of that early alarm system. Remember trauma echoes and how we talked about trauma echoes? Your sensory data is part of your body's self protection habits, right? So it really keeps score. It really holds on to this kind of data just in case you need it later. So we can use that. Now I want to give another example. We're going to show a video, and this is just for you to process in your own head, right? I want you to watch this video through the lens of you're the protagonist. Now, in this video, the protagonist is a Marvel character by the name of Quicksilver. Imagine you are Quicksilver, right? And you're navigating this particular reality. I want you to watch this video through the lens of what does it feel like? What do you think his body feels like? What do you think it tastes like? What do you think he can smell? Right? What are some of the sensations that he's feeling in this particular moment? And then we'll unpack it. All right, so that was one of the X-Men, right? The Quicksilver. He moves very fast and he was rescuing all those people. What are some of the sensory experiences he had? He was moving very fast, so he felt the wind on his face. He could smell the burning, right? Maybe he smelled pizza, maybe he smelled the soda, maybe he could smell perfume. At one point, he was close to somebody's face and he might have been able to smell their breath, right? His skin probably felt the warmth of that space. His mouth felt the coldness of that soda he drank, right? He caught the fish, so maybe his hands felt cold on that, right? He was moving very fast, so maybe his muscles felt engaged. All of those sensations play a role. They all are memories in our bodies, right? So when we're talking and having an experience, if he's just like, yeah, maybe you're talking to him and you're like, tell me about that experience. And he's just like, I ran in really fast and I got all the people and pulled them out. You know, tell me more about the fire. And then he might pause and really focus in on the fire. Tell me about the dog, right? Any one of those details, you can hone it in and say, tell me more about this. Say more about that. Say more about your feelings. What, if anything, do you remember your body feeling like? Like, I would be interested in that. What does your body feel like when you're running like that? Right? And you feel and you put them back in their bodies because it really makes a difference when we understand that we're bodies. We're these bodies walking through this planet and we're engaging with our experiences through our bodies, through our eyes, through our ears, through our nose, right? It's not all this intellectual experience, it's a full body experience. And so we can capitalize that in our communication techniques. One of the things that I really love is the sense of smell. Smell is what is the most direct way to the breath, or to the brain. And so asking about smell is my favorite way to hear about people's experiences because smell is so connected. Like, and I'm curious to see how COVID really changed the face of that smell because a lot of people are left without the sense of smell or without the sense of taste since then. And I wonder if it's changed for them on an individual level. Like I would be really interested in interviewing people about the way that their senses have changed. Because we already know that when somebody is walking through life, living their life, and then suddenly something happens where they lose their eyes, then suddenly they become super hearers and super smellers, and their other senses kind of come up and they become stronger in other ways. It's like our body continues to communicate with the outside world, and when we lose a sense, another sense takes over. And so it would be really interesting to hear how people who've lost these senses, where other senses have become superpowers, right? Like that might make a huge difference. Another area is emotions. Emotional memories are very interesting, and emotional memories connect very well to experiences. Like when you're feeling joy in a roller coaster, like maybe the person you're talking to is talking about this roller coaster they went on, and you might ask them, tell me about your emotions. Tell me about what you were feeling in that moment, and that's when they're going to start talking about joy. I felt joy. It was, and they're going to try to describe the joy. And that's where when you're pulling on that cluster of grapes, they might say something like, it just was so much joy. I hadn't felt joy like that since I was 5 years old. And when I was 5 years old, this thing happened to me that was just full of joy. Like I don't know, I was jumping into a lake and I was experiencing the water. And you get this pleasure of hearing the way their brains are connected to different things. That's the beauty of this, is you get to know people on a much more deeper level, a multi-level, right? Like you get to hear all kinds of stuff because we're connecting memories with emotions. We're allowing all those emotions to rise. That's also the same with trauma. Just remember that when somebody says, well, I felt ashamed, tell me more about the shame. More often than not, it's not just the shame of the experience that they're trying to describe to you, but the shame of their lifetime. It's the shame of when I was a child and I used to do this thing, my mom would pinch me because it was so bad. So I always felt ashamed. And then when I went to school, I would feel that shame because of this. And then, at this other moment in my life, it's just like they're remembering all of the times that they experienced shame. It comes together in one big cluster. And that can be very useful in understanding the human in front of you. Like maybe you're trying to connect with somebody and then shame rose. and they're just like, I'm feeling so ashamed. That is such a great moment to say, tell me more about shame, because then you're going to get an understanding. They're going to recall a history of that emotion for you. In my own marriage, that has been really helpful to understand some of the complicated feelings, because when some of those complicated emotions rise, I just have to say, tell me more about that. And he dives into all of his memories and tells me about all the different times that he felt these complicated feelings. And so now I know, as his wife, that this particular emotion is riddled with all kinds of things. And when that emotion rises, I know that I need to soften a little bit. I need to have more compassion, more empathy in that moment, because there's so much trauma in this particular space, and that's what's risen in this moment. That's useful for us to understand when we're trying to connect with other humans, because being a human is this wonderful, beautiful, terrible, horrible experience, right? It's like all of the things. Like all of us, not just victims of crime, but all of us have had these beautiful, joyful moments that are just so full of wonderful things. But we've all also had these terrible, horrible things that have happened to us that are also so full. And in our brains, sometimes they're connected and intertwined, and we can't separate them. And you can't separate other people either. We have to take them for their whole experiences. So this is very useful. Tell me about the temperature. How did your body feel? This is really a useful cue as well, because it's not something that people often ask. How did your body feel? Like, think about that in terms of a river run. Maybe you're a kayaker, right? And you're riding the waves, right? What did your body feel like in that moment? Like, that's a complicated question, because you're going to have to pause and be like, what did it feel like? Like it's something that we haven't thought about. So there's always a good chance for a pause, but then it comes back and it's just like it felt excited and alive. I felt so alive, right? Like there might be things like that. What did your body feel like when you were on the roller coaster? Even me thinking about the prompt, what did your body feel like when you were on a roller coaster? The last time I was on a roller coaster, I was terrified. It didn't have one of those shoulder straps, right? It just had a waist strap. And my body kept coming up off the chair, and I didn't feel really secure in the roller coaster. And I had actually just seen a YouTube video of a lady flying off of the roller coaster and dying. And so the whole time I was holding on to the strap on my legs, because I was terrified I was going to fall off, because I didn't feel secure in the shape, right? I didn't feel secure in that moment. I'll never go on a roller coaster again because of that particular feeling. I was terrified, right? And so, how did your body feel? It brought up all these feelings, these complicated things. But at the same time, that day at the Universal Studios was one of the best days of my life. I had so much fun, except for that roller coaster, right? So it brings up all these memories. It happens like that for people. This is a great one. What are you not able to forget? Sometimes when we're trying to communicate with other humans, there's these moments where it's just like, well, I don't remember. I don't remember. I don't remember. Like they had an experience, but they don't really remember it. Sometimes when people have had a lot of trauma, they don't remember it, like a car accident, right? Car accidents are great examples. It's pretty common for people not to remember the car accident. But in that moment, you might ask, well, what are you not able to forget? Right? Like, what is the thing about this that you are remembering? What's the thing? Maybe you don't even want to remember it, but you're not able to forget that. Fascinating. It's fascinating what comes up in this. What are you not able to forget about that particular moment? So if you're talking to somebody about an experience and they're like, honestly, I don't remember much about that. That's pretty common for someone to say, I don't really remember much about that. Well, what are you not able to forget? Like what's you don't remember much, but you do remember something. So what's the thing that you're remembering? Right? And it's really interesting, the things that they are. And again, it's the grape cluster. Once you pull on that one grape and you give them the space and time, more often than not, it's going to lead to other things. What was the most difficult part of your experience? What was the easiest part of your experience? What was your favorite part of the experience? What was the part of your experience you learned from, right? Any of those things. Well, we want to hear their pinnacles of their experience. This really is very useful. And then, of course, going into the prompts, how did you react in that particular moment? Like if someone was asking me about the roller coaster and my body coming up off of it, how did you react? Well, I put myself in a really uncomfortable position. I was holding onto the bar with my dear life. Like I wasn't going to go flying if best I could, right? Like that was my reaction. My back was really sore because I was sitting uncomfortably like that, right? So how did you react? Never on a roller coaster ever again in my whole life, right? That's the impact of that. That will never happen again. Will not go on that thing, right? How has this impacted or changed your life? And it really has. I mean, I was just at the Great Mall of America the day before yesterday, and there was a little tiny roller coaster in there. And even then I was just like, no, I'm not going on that. I'm with my 16-year-old kid and I'm just not going to do it anymore. Right. And that probably was something that he missed out on. So think about some of those things. There was a before the roller coaster and then there was an after the roller coaster. There's a before the car accident and then there's an after the car accident. There's a before this experience and an after. And seeing what changed, right? What changed in that moment is really fascinating. Even really good, powerful experiences, there's a before and an after. One of the things that I find fascinating about the human experiences is some of the worst moments bring about some of the best lessons. And so this has always been a very interesting cue for me because this is one of the areas where after the incident where we start seeing post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is when good things come from bad things. Now, you never want to be like, well, good thing that happened to you because now you have all this cool stuff, right? But it's really interesting how some of the best lessons come from some of the darkest moments. So this is a really great one. Is there anything else you want to share? Right. And then at that point, we're just like, kind of ending. Now, one of the things that I think is really interesting is every time I've talked to somebody in this way, it's very thought provoking because it's unusual. Like, it's not common for someone to say, what did it smell like? What did it sound like? What could you hear? Right. And so people walk away and they're still thinking about their experience. And it's really common for people to remember things later, to come back later and be like, honestly, like I went home and I was taking a shower and suddenly I was flooded with all these other things, all these other parts of that experience that I never remembered. And it's so useful, right? It's so useful for that. So I always let them know that it's very common to remember new things. And that's cool. And so a few things just to make this successful. Here's just a few things not to do. Okay, like here's this one. You can take a screenshot of this, but we're going to go over these really, really quickly. So feel free to take a screenshot, but let's go over them one by one. We never want to interrupt. When someone is talking, you might have something that you really want to say, but we don't want to interrupt in that particular moment. Just let them talk. We're just gathering as much information as we can. We're letting them empty the bucket. Wait, that didn't come all the way. We're gathering all the information. We're letting them totally emptying the bucket. We don't want to interrupt. We definitely don't want to explain their experience to them or hypothesize with them. We don't want to tell them, oh, you know what, let me actually tell you what you experienced, right? Like, have you ever heard that joke about mansplaining? And I know a lot of people over explain, not just men, but here's that joke is, do you know where a mansplainer gets his water? A well, actually, right? We don't want to do that. We don't want to hypothesize with them. We don't want to explain their experience to them. We just want them to have their experience. And just take it that way. We don't have to have compound questions. Compound questions is like, which flavor of ice cream do you prefer and why, right? Like it's multi questions in one. What time do you go to work in the morning? How do you get there and how long does it take, right? Like those are hard questions to conceptualize in someone's head. Are you in favor of less expensive or safer cars, right? Like that's a weird question, because it's got a lot of pieces to think about. And more often than not, they're not going to be able to answer all of the different pieces. So just one thing, which flavor of ice cream do you prefer? Like, and I would even reduce it to, tell me about ice cream because I'm going to get way more information about that. They're likely to tell me their favorite kind, but they might even tell me this like journey of ice cream. They might tell me their least favorite kind. They might tell me that they like to actually mix multiple ice creams together. I might learn that they don't actually eat ice cream, that they prefer chocolate candy bars, right? Like I'm not limiting them by that. Just tell me about ice cream. Tell me about your morning, right? And just kind of reduce it and bring it down as much. And if I can always use clarifying prompts if I need to. I definitely avoid confrontational questions. Like when we're doing dialogue, we're trying really hard not to be confrontational. This isn't a debate. It's not even a discussion, right? So we don't want to ask things that make them feel defensive. This is about opening the heart gate and creating connection and embodying safety. We don't want to ask weird questions that make them feel defensive in that moment because then it's going to stop. We don't want to ask why questions because that always feels complicated. We want to avoid sequencing, and this one's tough because people love a timeline of events. During a real good dialogue where you're gathering information like that, it's going to be common for the bubble for information to come out in a lot of different directions. Remember, you're pulling at the grapes, and that grape cluster is going to have all kinds of stuff in that. We just pull at the grapes as it comes out and let it come out organically. If you absolutely need a timeline, then what we recommend in criminal justice is that you're just recording the interview and you're listening full attentive. You're not taking notes. The reason why we don't recommend taking notes is because it's weird. It's weird to take notes. If you've ever been to a therapist and your therapist is listening, 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 and then suddenly they get the pen and they start writing something down, that's completely distracting. Now you're like, what did they just write down? Right? What do they think of me? When you do a conversation in this way, it's almost like watching a movie, right? Like anybody can watch a movie and get the movie. Like you don't go to a movie and take notes. You get in the movie and you experience the movie. You're in the protagonist's experience. Dialogue this way is like watching a movie. You're in the movie. And if you need to like go back in criminal justice, we ask them to record it and then they can go through and look at the transcripts and put it in a timeline if they need to. But interestingly, you don't usually need a timeline because it's just like watching a movie. You're getting the context of the situation, you're getting the before, the after, you're understanding decision making. It's really interesting. So we don't do a sequencing. One of the reasons also why we don't do sequencing is because during a lot of high stress situations, the prefrontal cortex takes a step back, right? We learned that in the neuroscience training, and the amygdala is in charge in that moment. And it's the prefrontal cortex that does critical thinking, that does sequencing. Now, one thing also to be aware of is that culturally speaking, some cultures are chronic cultures and some are polychronic cultures. What that means is that some people think in a logical linear timeline. Like some cultures think like that. This, then that, then this. But some people think more circularly, right? And their experiences are articulated in a more circular nature naturally. And so trying to get those folks to work on a sequence is extra hard for them. We definitely don't want to have leading questions because that messes with the memory. One of the things to keep in mind about memories is that every time you have a memory, you're not remembering the experience. You're remembering the last time you remembered the experience. You know what I mean? It's like your memories are always open to edit. And so, like, when I'm talking about the last time I was on a roller coaster, I'm not remembering the time I was actually on the roller coaster. I'm remembering the last time I talked about being on the roller coaster. And I'm adding new things every time, right? So 5 years from now, I will have kind of manipulated this memory and it'll be a little bit off, right? So that's one of the reasons why in criminal justice, we only want people to be interviewed one time by a professional interviewer, because once we open that memory up, we're opening it up to audit. which is also very interesting because psychologically speaking, one of the psychological modalities with navigating trauma is to open up memories and to say, okay, let's look at that memory. What are different things that I could have done? What are different ways that I could have reacted to that? Is there a way for me to feel better about this situation? And they like kind of go in and they start massaging the memory and incorporating different outcomes, different things. They might be like, okay, let's go into that memory. Can you see the seeds of post-traumatic growth? Can you see how, this started to grow here and that? And they start manipulating the memory in some forms of modality, and it seems to be very effective. So just keep in mind, leading questions are the same way. It's like, did you see Michael at 3 o'clock? I don't know, maybe I did. Or maybe have you had this experience? This happens with my husband and I all the time, where we go and we get in the car and then I look at him and I say, do you remember, did you turn off the stove? Just the asking, did I turn off the stove? Suddenly he's just like, I thought I did, but now I don't know. Now I don't know. Now, because you asked, I'm not sure. I have to go back in and see, right? Because I've kind of manipulated that particular moment. Did Janice strike you in the face with her fist? I don't know. Was it a fist? Was it a hand? All the things. Like, we don't always understand. So we don't want to we don't want to lead those questions. We don't want to minimize. Minimizing is telling somebody like, your experience is smaller than you think it was, right? Keep in mind that maybe in your head it's a really small experience, but they felt shame in that particular moment. But they're not feeling shame from that particular moment. They're feeling the weight of shame from their whole experience. So for them, it might be this really big thing. And even for you, it's just this tiny little thing, right? Like maybe they're embarrassed. The other day, my friend posted, she's like, look at the kind of day I'm having. And she took a picture of her feet and she was wearing 2 different shoes. For me, that's no big deal. I'd be like, oh, no big deal. And I might even comment and be like, oh, that's nothing, right? That's minimizing it. For her, it might be something really huge because it might be connected to this other experience that's really big, right? Like there's no way for us to know how someone's actually experiencing something because we don't know their whole history. Now, obviously, we don't want to paint people into corners with our questions. So, let's just stay as open as possible. No double negatives. Double negatives are so weird. You did not believe that the light was red, right? That is not your signature at the bottom of the document. You couldn't not go to their party, right? Right. So like those kind of questions can be very confusing. When using this technique, we work really hard to be the person who's doing the least amount of talking. We work really hard to just let them empty their bucket completely 100%. It's not a true dialogue in the form is when we're trying to hear somebody's experience, we're going to just stay with the few prompts and we're going to let them completely empty their bucket. When I've done a forensic interview, I've done my longest interview that I've done in one sitting because I always let the person empty their whole bucket was 3 hours. And in that 3 hour time, I only asked 5 prompts total and like 2 cues. Like it was just very minimal. I had very little to say in that moment because I was so focused on just letting them empty their buckets. And I got this huge experience out of all of that was rich and multi-layered and full of context that reached into their childhood and then came back out. I got to know this person in such a deeper, more profound way because of this. Now, as we start to close out, I want to leave you with this. This is a holistic self-care plan, and I think I probably gave it to you the first training as well. You can access it via QR code. At the very, very end, I'm going to give you my website and my email address. But this self-care plan is 79 pages long. It's huge. But the reason why it's so long is because we've included a lot of the self-regulation techniques in this plan. So like when you're talking to somebody and they start going into hyper arousal or hypo arousal, we want to make sure that you have the skills and the tools to be able to start bringing someone back into their window of tolerance. And then also too, this is just a great way to start thinking about being a healthy human being because What's really interesting is when people are on their deathbeds. Like I've read a lot of deathbed studies because I'm always interested. Like when somebody's at that point where they know they're going to die, what's happening in that moment? And part of it's just curiosity, part of it's preparation, right? It's like we're all going to be there someday, and I'm just so curious about that jumping off spot. That spot we leave our bodies. What does that look like? And a lot of people talk about the connections they've made in life. People don't talk about their cars or their houses or their diamonds, right? People don't talk about their material things. What they talk about is their children, their parents, their grandparents, their friends, their neighbors. They talk about the humans in their lives. I think the ultimate form of self-care is being able to connect with other humans. And part of that really is more effective communication. I love using these techniques in connecting with the people around me because I get such a deeper connection with them. And I think that that is really, really awesome. I love that deeper connection. I love knowing the people around me more holistically. And so, I see this very much so as part of like practicing self-care and being a healthy human because you're opening yourself to this kind of connection. Now, at this point, this is my website and this is my email address. If anybody wants to jump on a Zoom and ask questions about this webinar, I know that a lot of people watch the recording of this, and so I just want to make myself available if you have questions or concerns, or you want to learn more, or you're like, okay, I got all this information, but I am somebody who documents. I'd love to talk about the documentation process that goes with this because it's a little different. Like, how do you document the smell, right? So we have that detangled out as well. So at this point, I know we're closing 10 minutes early, but this is the point where we would stop the recording and do questions and answers. So we'll go ahead and do that right now.
Thank you, Myra.